Hello and welcome to the Grounded Athlete, which is a platform I created to spread awareness for grounding and all of the awesome things it can do for your spiritual, mental, and physical well-being. This is a movement that incorporates science into the very spiritual process of being connected to the earth. And to all of you who have followed me from the get-go, you'll know that this isn't just being barefoot on the ground. A lot of really cool things happen when you provide a channel for the earth's surface charge into your body. It's going to be a great week here. It's Thanksgiving week. We're all going to be taking some time to connect with our loved ones and be thankful for what we have and who we have. And we're going to kick ass in our workouts this week so we can eat whatever the hell we want come Thanksgiving Day. This week I'm going to be releasing a series of videos, around 7 to 8 total, which I'm going to deem the grounding vagal connection. So you'll be seeing a lot of my face this week, which I'm not sorry, talking about vagal tone and grounding. So get ready. Hey guys, I'm really excited to get into this next topic, which is grounding and vagal tone. I know it's been a while since my last video, but trust me, these topics and these videos do take time to learn and simplify and edit, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to segment this video series into a 5-video prelude, just to give you some context and to break up what would be a really long video, because no one wants to watch me talk for 40 minutes, even though I am devastatingly handsome and well-spoken, but we're not going to do that. So again, I'm really excited to talk about this one, so let's get into it. All right, so I'm going to give you some context on the vagus and vagal tone before we really start incorporating grounding. And I've indirectly touched on this topic before with my last video on heart rate variability, and you'll find out how as we go on, but because the two are connected. But again, I think it's important to get a good understanding of what vagal tone is before we start jumping into how grounding affects this. And a really quick thank you for following and sharing and interacting with this page. I'm happy that you guys are finding value in the content that I'm putting out. It's extremely fulfilling work to tell you guys about this. So again, thank you. So what is the vagus nerve? This is the primary nerve through which bidirectional parasympathetic activity travels between the heart and the brain. And it does much more than this, but we're just going to focus on these components for now. To touch briefly on this, parasympathetic activity is unconscious activity meant to counteract your sympathetic nervous system response. So after you undergo a stress and the physiological changes that happen with the sympathetic nervous system response, such as an increase in heart rate, increase in breathing, blood pressure, your parasympathetic nervous system works to counteract that, bring you back into that homeostatic state via vagal activity. So this is the 10th of 12 pairs of cranial nerves that exist within your sensory somatic nervous system. So primary nerves of your parasympathetic nervous system, which originate in the medulla oblongata of your brainstem. It splits off into the left and right side of your body, and it connects most of the major organs between your brain and your colon. This is the nerve that's commonly associated with the mind-body connection. So you can have a high vagal tone or a low vagal tone. And to have a high vagal tone, it just means that you're better able to relax after stress. With a strong vagal tone, you're better able to regulate blood glucose. You got a reduced risk for stroke, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. When you stimulate the vagus, you're stimulating your relaxation response. A low vagal tone, on the other hand, or low vagus activity, is associated with something we talk a lot about on this page, which is inflammation. So metabolic disease is rooted in inflammation. When you have a low vagal tone, it means you're not able to switch out of that sympathetic nervous system response as efficiently, so you're always in that fight or flight response. A healthy individual will remain in a mostly calm state with a high vagal tone, but you'll often experience these fluctuations of positive stress. Now in your eyes, this might not be positive stress because this is you most likely getting ramped up over something. But over time, your body needs these stressors to change and adapt and get stronger. But when that stress subsides, you should be able to quickly switch back into that calm state. This is healthy. Healthy people don't have less stress than you have. Some of them might, but for the most part, they're just able to deal with stress a lot better. And part of that's having a higher vagal tone. So that was your warm-up. Now let's get more specific into what vagal tone is. It is a marker of stress, vulnerability, and reactivity. How well can you handle it? Again, this is referring to the activity of your vagus nerve, and we can't measure this directly, so we'll look at the processes affected by it as sort of a proxy to measure where you're at in terms of vagal tone, particularly heart rate variability, breathing. And what do I mean by proxy? So a higher vagal tone, meaning your vagus is more active, is associated with a lower heart rate and a higher heart rate variability. You can measure heart rate variability specifically with an EKG, or you can get a pretty good understanding of it by just observing your heart rate. How does that work? So your heart rate is in large part controlled by this internal pacemaker called the sinoatrial node. Your heart cells operate by automaticity, which means they can spontaneously depolarize and generate electrical potentials. The electrical activity of your SA node sets the pace for your heart. This is pretty cool shit, right? Like electricity in the body. That's why I talk about this all the time. I like to think of people as circuits. Your cells are specialized to generate electrical currents. All of your cells use these ionic charged elements like potassium, magnesium, calcium to generate electricity and send signals. It's how signals get sent between the vagus and the heart. So these two branches of your autonomic nervous system, your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system, they kind of just tug and pull at each other to increase or decrease heart rate, blood pressure, breathing. So where does the vagus come into play in all of this? The vagus nerve acts on your SA node by slowing its conduction, which modulates vagal tone. So because of this effect on heart rate and heart rate variability, we can get a glimpse at your vagal tone and ultimately how active or not active your parasympathetic nervous system is. So let's do a little experiment here. Let's hold our fingers up to our carotid artery and we'll take a deep breath in and then we'll let it out. What I want you to pay really close attention to is what your heart does when you take that deep breath in and when you let it out. So cycle through a couple times. I'll do it with you. This is an example of heart rate variability. What you should have noticed, I hope, is that when you took that deep breath in, your heart rate increased, and then when you let it out, your heart rate decreased. This is a phenomenon called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and it's an important thing for clinicians to look for. The bigger the difference between your inhale heart rate and your exhale heart rate, the higher your vagal tone. So how does this work exactly? So when you inhale, that intrathoracic pressure goes down because of the downward movement of the diaphragm. This also decreases the atrial pressure of your heart. This leads to an increase in blood flow to the heart and reduces the activity of those pressure-sensitive baroreceptors, which bring down your vagal tone. So all this leads to an increase in heart rate, which makes sense, right? Because vagal tone goes down, heart rate goes up, parasympathetic activity goes down. On the other hand, when you breathe out, when you exhale, that diaphragm goes up, pressure increases, baroreceptor activity goes up, there's less blood flow to the heart, so heart rate goes down. So heart rate is down, vagal tone goes up, parasympathetic activity goes up. So this is heart activity giving us a feedback system of sorts for our vagal tone. The heart here is essentially listening to the way you breathe and adjusting your heart rate accordingly. So it's the exhale that triggers the relaxation response. Vagal tone is highest, vagal activity is highest, heart rate is lowest when you're breathing out. So I'm just sticking to that cardiopulmonary component of vagal tone right now, but to add to that, respiratory sinus arrhythmia increases in those that are at rest. Obviously, because when you're at rest, heart rate variability is going to go up. So more variation in between each one of those heart rates. No, we're over here. To indicate that your autonomic nervous system isn't getting taken over by your sympathetic stress response. So a higher HRV means you're better able to cope with stress. To get into the mental health and psychological aspect of this, and this is being studied more in children and newborns, cardiac vagal tone is known to be linked to many of the relevant domains of psychophysiological research, and this includes self-regulation of cognitive, social, and emotional health levels, internalizing, externalizing disorders. Low vagal activity is associated with poor emotional and attentional regulation in children, and there's evidence showing that low vagal activity is a good clinical marker of stress sensitivity in kids. No, we're over here. Which is becoming more and more prevalent these days, particularly the internalizing disorders like anxiety and depression. You know, kids in their early teens that are developing these anxiety and depressive related disorders, which is just insane to me. But these children that have higher vagal tones, they're less likely to develop these problems because their bodies, they can handle the stress better. So it would behoove us to be more considerate of vagal activity when we're looking at interventions for these kids that are having trouble adapting to psychosocial stressors, which makes them more likely to develop these anxiety and depressive related disorders. So in infants, particularly with higher vagal tones, they're more facially expressive, they're more reactive to novel events, they can sustain attention a lot longer. And another really interesting thing about this is that this can be passed on from mother to child. So mothers who are anxious and depressed during their pregnancy they have low vagal tones, and this can be seen in their newborns who also have low vagal tones and low serotonin and low dopamine levels. All right, so last little tidbit here, we want a high vagal tone. We want to be able to relax much more efficiently after a stressful event. So what's going to happen when we keep this high? Our HRV is going to improve, our blood pressure is going to improve, we're going to have better digestion, because digestion is a parasympathetic activity. If you're always stressed, you're not going to be able to fully digest everything all the nutrients that you're putting in your body. You're going to have better blood sugar regulation, you're going to have better mood, less anxiety, less reduced risk for stroke and cardiovascular disease. And how can we improve our vagal activity? So we improve it by stimulating the vagus through things like exercise, deep breathing, breath work, singing, humming, because the vocal cords are innervated by the vagus. Cold exposure, omega-3 supplementation, improving the gut microbiome, meditation, mindfulness, positive social interaction, staying away from those toxic people that we all have in our lives. So there are 100% ways to improve this, and now I think we can add another way, which is what I'll be talking about next. All of this introductory information just served as a prelude to get to what I really wanted to talk about, which is how grounding can improve vagal tone. So neurologists are finding that they can use electric currents to stimulate the vagus nerve and treat inflammatory conditions. They use it to treat like depression, epilepsy, rheumatoid arthritis, and so an electrical treatment. And what is grounding? It's an electrical process. So there was a study done in 2017 that looked at how electrical grounding affected the vagal tones in preterm infants. And preterm just means that these babies were born too early, before that 37 weeks of pregnancy is completed. So it affects about 1 in 10 babies here in the US. So now that I've given you some context, I'm hoping that this information is a lot clearer and a lot more meaningful. But to dial back here, so low vagal activity in these infants means it's just an indicator of how stressed they are. So when they're in this state of low vagal activity, they're more likely to develop things like necrotizing enterocolitis, which is a horrible disease that affects their intestine, the walls of their intestine specifically. So this bacteria invades the walls of their intestine, creates all sorts of inflammation and infection, and can destroy the walls of their intestine and kill about 15 to 40% of the babies who do have this. So when these children are in the NICU, they're surrounded by this equipment that induces an electromagnetic field on them. This creates an electrical potential, a charge that's measurable on their skin. These are those 50 to 60 hertz alternating currents that I've touched on before. So these incubators are powered by these low frequency electromagnetic fields. These low frequency EMF fields have been shown to produce biological changes in fetuses and cultured cells. So there's a pretty high probability that it's negatively impacting these preterm infants. Now it's been shown before that when these incubators are turned off, the vagal tone of these babies, it increases. I'm not saying let's get rid of incubators because that's ridiculous, but maybe add something that reduces the damage that these EMF fields are inducing. So when you're exposed to these alternating currents, there's an induced voltage on your skin surface. And so when you ground yourself, when you're connected to electrical ground, this voltage disappears. So what they wanted to do was see if electrical grounding to the earth would reduce skin potential and improve vagal tone, and to see if vagal tone and skin potential were correlated. So what did they do? They took 26 preterm babies and they measured their skin potential, and they measured the heart rate variability in the 20 that were grounded with an electrode patch that was connected to the earth. This heart rate variability was assessed by monitoring those high frequencies. That higher frequencies component of heart rate variability that's more associated with parasympathetic activity. And so this was measured before, during, and after grounding. So what happened when these babies were grounded? The skin voltage, the charge on their skin, dropped instantly as soon as they were grounded. What they found was an inverse relationship between high frequencies HRV and skin voltage. So a higher skin voltage meant lower vagal tone, low skin voltage or no skin voltage meant higher vagal tone. And simple as that, well, maybe not so simple, somewhat simple as that, grounding improved vagal tone, which is awesome. But we already kind of knew that, didn't we, with my last video on heart rate variability, because I said the two were connected, and they are. Now we've just taken it one step further and introduced the vagus. So what does all this mean? It means that the earth electrical grounding stimulates the vagus in a very natural way. When these highly mobile free electrons enter your body, a lot of really, really cool things happen. It also means that it's extremely important for mothers to consistently ground during their pregnancy to not only improve their own vagal tone, but that genetic component that they pass on to their children, and to consistently ground your children so that they're better able to take on this life of infinite stressors with a strong vagal tone. So a healthier vagal tone means a healthier life. More grounding, better vagal tone. As always, thank you guys for watching and supporting the Grounded Athlete. I hope you guys are finding a ton of value and you're learning a lot from the content that I'm putting out. And to all of you who have been supporting my movement by getting a pair of sandals, that means more to me than you know. So thank you. I will continue to do this until I no longer have to, when everybody knows about it.